Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane Ashby had always been a man who carried his grudges close to his chest, never one to reveal every card in his deck until the exact moment it could cause the most damage. But this time, as he stood in the shadows of Newman Towers, glaring down at a trembling Claire Newman, there was an unmistakable menace in his voice that suggested he was done playing quiet, patient games and was finally ready to tear apart every secret that had been swept beneath the Newman family rug. His Australian drawl sharpened with fury as he leaned close to Claire, whose blue eyes darted with panic, and he hissed that if she didn't stop trying to manipulate Kyle Abbott and playing her dangerous push-and-pull games with Holden Novak, then he would make sure the world knew the truth about her biological mother. The truth that could send shockwaves not just through her life but through the entire Newman legacy, a truth Claire had worked so desperately to bury beneath her new identity, her new chance at redemption after the whole Jordan-related mess. And as Kane's words sliced through the air like glass shattering against a marble floor, neither of them realized that just outside the cracked door to the office, Victoria Newman stood frozen in place, her expensive leather heels rooted to the ground, her hands clutched tightly around a folder of contracts she had intended to drop off for Claire, and the blood drained from her face as she realized she was hearing the unvarnished confession of a secret she had only ever suspected in whispers but never dared to voice aloud. Kane's voice rose, almost taunting now, as if he knew that this information was more powerful than any leverage he had held in years, declaring that Claire was not who she thought she was, that her so-called fresh start in Genoa City was built on lies, that her biological mother was not some faceless figure from her past but someone the Newman family knew all too well, someone who had the ability to destroy Victoria's sense of stability in one cruel revelation. And Kane pressed further, telling Claire that she could deny it all she wanted, but DNA never lies, and the tangled web that had been spun years ago was unraveling because he was prepared to hold a press conference if necessary, prepared to blow the roof off the Newman dynasty, prepared to humiliate Victor Newman, the man who had humiliated him, by proving that his precious granddaughter was tied by blood to a woman whose very name could send Victoria into a spiral of rage. Claire's hands shook as she pleaded with Kane to stop, begged him not to go down this road, her lips quivering as she whispered that she was just trying to find love, just trying to prove she wasn't the broken, abandoned girl who had once been used by Jordan to settle an old score. But Kane's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a cold determination, and he spat back that she didn't get to play victim anymore, not when she was weaving herself into the lives of the Abbott men, not when she was cozying up to Holden, and certainly not when she had Kyle Abbott practically on his knees with an engagement ring dangling in front of her. Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears as she heard Kane's next words that made her entire body stiffen as though she had been struck by lightning, for Kane growled that if Claire didn't come clean soon, he would tell everyone that her biological mother was none other than a woman whose past was soaked in Newman scandal, someone Victoria had clashed with repeatedly, someone whose history with Genoa City was littered with betrayal and forbidden affairs. And in that instant, Victoria realized she had walked into a nightmare she couldn't unhear, because the implication wasn't vague anymore. It was direct, heavy, unmistakable. Kane knew the truth that even Victor had worked tirelessly to keep locked away. Victoria stumbled back, her breath ragged, the folder slipping from her hands and scattering papers across the polished floor, the sound startling both Kane and Claire, who turned toward the door in unison, their faces draining of color as Victoria stepped inside, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and dread, demanding to know what exactly Kane had been threatening, demanding answers in that imperious tone only she could deliver. And while Claire stammered and tried to form words, Kane smiled coldly, a predator finally watching his prey cornered, and he said, almost with relish, that Victoria already knew in her heart, that the reason she had always been so unsettled by Claire was because somewhere deep inside, she had sensed the blood tie that connected them all, the ghost of a woman who had once stolen Victoria's thunder, stolen Victor's loyalty, and left scars on the Newman Empire. Kane was ready to spill every sordid detail, right there and then, daring Victoria to stop him, daring Claire to admit it, daring the walls of Newman Towers to collapse under the weight of a truth that could no longer be contained. And as Victoria's chest rose and fell in rapid waves, her mind raced with 100 possibilities, with names she didn't want to say aloud, with memories she had worked tirelessly to repress, And she knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again, because the secret of Claire's biological mother was about to explode across Genoa City like a match thrown onto gasoline, leaving her family, her daughter, her father, and her entire empire vulnerable to destruction at the hands of Cain Ashby, the one man who had just declared he was ready to burn it all to the ground simply to prove he still mattered. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she tried to process what she had just overheard, her mind spinning like a runaway carousel that refused to stop, the edges blurring into chaos. Cain's smirk, the arrogance etched into his posture, only fueled her fury, while Claire's wide, fearful eyes betrayed a young woman on the brink of collapse, and for a fleeting second Victoria wasn't sure which emotion demanded her attention more, her need to tear Cain apart for threatening her family, or her need to demand the truth from Claire before the floor opened up and swallowed them all into the abyss. "Tell me," Victoria snapped, her voice sharp and commanding, echoing in the sleek walls of the office like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. "Right now. Cain, if you have something to say, then say it to my face, not in backroom threats." Cain chuckled, low and dangerous, taking a deliberate step closer, his confidence radiating off him as though he had already won. "Isn't that the Newman way?" he said with venom. "Secrets, lies, control, always sweeping dirt under Persian rugs and hoping no one trips over the bulge. But this isn't just dirt, Victoria. This is a buried body, and you're standing right on top of it." Claire's voice cracked, almost childlike as she whispered, "Please, stop. Don't do this." But Cain ignored her, his eyes locked on Victoria like a man savoring the taste of long-awaited vengeance. "She's your sister's daughter," Cain spat suddenly, like ripping off a band-aid to expose a wound still festering beneath. "Claire's mother is Eve Howard." The name struck Victoria like a slap across the face. Eve Howard, the woman who had haunted her family's past for decades, who had seduced her father Victor, who had tangled herself into the Newman orbit with a desperation that left scars nobody wanted to revisit. Eve, who had once been obsessed with Victor and bore a son, Cole Howard, a man who had played a complicated role in Victoria's own history. The memories flooded back in a dizzying rush, and Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Claire gasped, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, unable to bear the confrontation. "No," Victoria muttered, shaking her head violently. "That's impossible. Eve is dead. She died years ago." Cain's grin widened. "Dead? Yes. But not before leaving one last legacy. A daughter. A daughter who was tucked away, hidden, manipulated, and then unleashed at the perfect time. Does that sound familiar, Victoria? Does it remind you of a certain woman named Jordan who pulled the strings, feeding off this girl's confusion and abandonment?" He jabbed a finger toward Claire, who flinched as though the gesture itself was a physical blow. Victoria's head pounded with the implications, her mind tearing through the twisted timeline of events. Jordan had poisoned Claire's life, true, but Jordan was only part of the story. If what Cain was saying was true, then Claire's entire existence wasn't just an accident of cruelty, it was tied by blood to the most destructive figure in Newman family history. Her stomach churned as she remembered her own youthful entanglement with Cole Howard, Eve's son. If Claire was Eve's daughter, did that mean? No, she shut the thought down before it could finish. It was too vile, too impossible to accept. "You're lying," Victoria finally growled, her fists clenching at her sides. "This is another one of your pathetic attempts to make yourself relevant, Cain. You'll say anything if it means hurting my family. You've hated my father for years. You've resented me, and you think by dangling Claire in front of me like some twisted pawn you'll get the upper hand. But you're bluffing." Cain's expression hardened, his playful smirk replaced by deadly seriousness. "Do I look like I'm bluffing? I have the DNA results, Victoria. I didn't want to go there, but Claire's curiosity about her past, her little slip-ups, her medical records, it all lined up. She is Eve Howard's daughter, and if you think I won't use that, think again." He pulled a manila envelope from inside his jacket and waved it tauntingly. "Proof. Concrete proof. You want to deny it? Go ahead. But this paper doesn't lie. And once the media gets their hands on it, do you think your father will still parade Claire around as the picture of redemption? Or will he crumble under the weight of knowing his enemy's blood runs right through her veins?" Victoria staggered back a step, the room closing in around her. She could practically hear Victor's booming voice in her head, could imagine the rage that would consume him when he learned that the granddaughter he had been cautiously warming to carried Eve Howard's DNA. He would see betrayal, weakness, contamination. And Nikki, dear God, her mother would be shattered, reminded of every wound Eve had ever inflicted on their marriage. The ripple effect would devastate the Newmans. Claire sobbed quietly, whispering, "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know. I didn't want to know." But Victoria's anger flared, her protective instincts battling her disgust. "And you," she snapped at Claire, her voice trembling. "You knew something, didn't you? Deep down, you had to have known. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me instead of letting Kane hold this over your head?" Claire broke, collapsing into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "Because I was scared," she choked out. "Because every time I try to be honest, it blows up in my face. I wanted a fresh start, Victoria. I wanted to belong. And I knew if this came out, you'd all look at me like I was a poison you couldn't scrub away." Her words were drenched in pain, and for a fleeting moment, Victoria saw the wounded girl beneath the chaos, the niece who had been tossed around like a pawn by manipulators. But Kane wasn't done twisting the knife. He leaned forward, his voice low and razor-sharp. "See, Victoria? That's your problem. You Newmans never deal with the truth until it's shoved in your faces. And this is the kind of truth that will rot you from the inside out." Victoria snapped her head toward him, her eyes narrowing with lethal resolve. "If you think you can blackmail me, or my family, you are gravely mistaken. I don't care what papers you think you have. I'll destroy them, and I'll destroy you if you try." Kane chuckled darkly. "There's the Victoria I know. Ruthless. Just like your father. But remember this, destroy me, and the truth still exists. And when it comes out, it won't just ruin Claire. It'll ruin you, too. Because the world will know you had suspicions, and you still brought her into Newman Enterprises, still let her near your family. You'll be complicit in the lie." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by Claire's muffled sobs. Victoria's throat burned with unspoken fury, but her mind churned with strategy. She couldn't let Kane run free with this, but she also couldn't let Victor learn the truth in such a public, humiliating way. She needed to control the narrative. She needed time. "Get out," she hissed finally, her voice ice cold. "Get out of my office before I call security." Kane smirked one last time, tucking the envelope back into his jacket. "Tick-tock, Victoria. The clock is running. Decide quickly. Are you going to tell your father yourself, or shall I?" With that, he turned and strolled out, leaving the atmosphere thick with tension. The moment the door shut, Victoria's fury cracked, and she turned on Claire. "You listen to me," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "If this is true, if even a fraction of this is true, then you have to decide whose side you're on. Because once this bomb goes off, there's no going back. My father will never forgive you. And I don't know if I can, either." Claire lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be Eve's daughter. I don't want to be her shadow. I just want a chance to be me. Please, don't give up on me." Victoria faltered, torn between compassion and fury. She saw her own reflection in Claire, the same desperation for acceptance, the same battle between legacy and individuality. But she also saw danger, betrayal, and the ghost of Eve Howard laughing from beyond the grave. Victoria pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to breathe through the storm. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Everything." As the weight of the revelation settled, Victoria realized she had a choice to make. She could bury this truth, protect Claire, and risk Kane unleashing hell at any moment. Or she could march straight to Victor, tell him everything, and watch Claire's fragile chance at belonging disintegrate in an instant. Either way, the fallout would be catastrophic. And as the night stretched on, Victoria knew one thing for certain. Eve Howard may have been dead for years, but her ghost had just been resurrected in the most destructive way imaginable, and the Newmans were about to pay the price. Victoria didn't sleep that night. Sleep was impossible with the revelation pulsing in her mind like a migraine that refused to let go. Every memory of Eve Howard clawing its way back to the surface. She had spent decades trying to shove Eve into the dark corners of history, But now Eve's shadow had taken on flesh and blood in the form of Claire Newman. Eve hadn't just haunted her family, she had been resurrected in a living reminder, and Victoria couldn't ignore it. She sat in her glass-walled office long past midnight, the city lights of Genoa City stretching out beneath her like a taunting reminder that everything she had built, every ounce of control she maintained, could collapse with one whispered secret. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from Nate, board members, even Nikki. But she ignored them all, her mind consumed with one image, her father's face when he found out. She could already see it. The vein in Victor's temple bulging, his voice booming with betrayal, his wrath directed at everyone in his path, including her. Meanwhile, Claire sat curled up in her small apartment, rocking herself on the couch as she clutched a photo of her late mother figure. Not Eve, but the foster woman who had raised her for a time. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why me? Why do I always have to carry everyone's sins?" She thought of Kyle, of Holden, of the fragile hope she had that maybe she could build something normal. Now, it all felt like sand slipping through her fingers. How could she ever face Kyle if he knew her bloodline? How could she stand in Holden's arms when whispers of Eve Howard would echo around her? She pressed her forehead against her knees, wishing she could disappear, wishing Jordan had never found her, wishing she had never stepped foot in Genoa City. But Kane, unlike the others, was energized by the chaos. He sat at society with a drink in hand, staring at the manila envelope like it was a loaded weapon he had finally been permitted to fire. Kane had nothing left to lose, or so he believed. His reputation was scarred, his business ventures shaky, his personal life in shambles, but this secret gave him relevance again. For years, Victor Newman had humiliated him, written him off as a con man, a mistake in Lily's life, a failure in Genoa City. Now, Kane thought, he held the nuclear codes to the Newman dynasty. The power was intoxicating. Yet a small part of him wrestled with guilt as he thought about Claire's tear-stained face. She was young, fragile, desperate to be seen as more than her mistakes. But Kane hardened his resolve. If she wanted mercy, she should have chosen a different family to attach herself to. The following morning, Victoria arrived at the Newman ranch, her face pale, her hair uncharacteristically loose as if she hadn't had the strength to compose herself. Nikki was sipping coffee in the sitting room, but one glance at her daughter made her set the cup down instantly. "Victoria," Nikki said, standing quickly. "What happened? You look shaken." Victoria opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't say it yet. She wasn't ready to shatter her mother's calm. So she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a late night at the office. I'll be fine." Nikki narrowed her eyes but didn't press. Victor, however, wasn't so easily distracted. He entered moments later, crisp in one of his tailored suits, his presence commanding as always. He studied Victoria with a sharp gaze, the way a general studies a soldier who has returned from battle wounded but silent. "Something's wrong," he stated flatly. "What is it?" Victoria stiffened. Here it was, the moment she had dreaded. But instead of blurting the truth, she pivoted. "It's Kane," she said carefully, testing the waters. "He's stirring up trouble again." Victor's jaw tightened instantly. "That bastard. What has he done now?" Before Victoria could answer, the doorbell rang. The butler announced Kane Ashby. Victoria's blood turned to ice. He had come here. He had brought the storm straight to their doorstep. Kane strolled in with false humility, nodding at Nikki, then smirking faintly at Victor. "Victor," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." Victor's eyes narrowed, his voice dangerous. "I don't recall inviting you to my home." Kane shrugged. "You'll want to hear what I have to say. Trust me." Victoria jumped in, panic rising. "Dad, don't. He's just trying to bait you." But Kane cut her off. "It's about Claire." The name alone shifted the atmosphere like a thunderclap. Victor's expression darkened, his protective instincts immediately engaged. "What about my granddaughter?" he demanded. Nikki tensed, her hand flying to her pearls. Kane glanced at Victoria, savoring her barely restrained fury, then pulled the envelope from his jacket. "She's not who you think she is. Claire Newman isn't just Jordan's victim. She's blood. Eve Howard's blood." The silence that followed was deafening. Nikki gasped, her face paling as she stumbled back, one hand gripping the arm of the sofa for support. Victor's entire body stiffened, his eyes blazing with rage. What the hell did you just say? Kane placed the envelope on the coffee table like it was a bomb primed to detonate. DNA results. Irrefutable. Claire is Eve Howard's daughter. Nikki let out a strangled cry, memories rushing back of Eve's manipulations, the way she had clawed her way into their lives, tried to steal Victor's loyalty, nearly destroyed their marriage. No, this can't be true, she whispered. That woman, she's been dead for years. Kane tilted his head, his smirk cruel. Dead, yes. But her legacy lives on. Right in your living room, every time Claire smiles at you. Victor's fists clenched, his face turning red with fury. He shot a glare at Victoria, his voice trembling with volcanic rage. Did you know about this? Victoria froze, tears stinging her eyes. She opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. I overheard Kane telling Claire yesterday. I wasn't sure if it was real. The admission only enraged Victor further. And you kept it from me. His voice boomed through the ranch like a cannon. Nikki flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. Victor, please. But Victor was unstoppable now, pacing like a caged animal. Eve Howard has poisoned my family for the last time. And you, he growled at Victoria. You should have come to me immediately. Victoria's own anger ignited, fueled by shame and fear. Don't you dare put this all on me, she snapped, her voice rising. I was trying to process it, trying to figure out the truth before I destroyed Claire's life. She's young, she's vulnerable, she didn't ask for any of this. Victor cut her off with a roar. She carries Eve's blood. That makes her dangerous. That makes her untrustworthy. Nikki gasped at his words, clutching her chest. Victor, she's still our granddaughter, she pleaded. She's still Harrison's aunt, Kyle's. She is nothing. Victor thundered. Nothing but a reminder of the worst mistake of my life.